Kate, on the continent, it's being portrayed very much that Euroscepticism in Britain and the Brexit side, the Leave side, is mainly from the right side.
Well, we certainly had a very broad coalition during the campaign, and that was absolutely crucial. Obviously, I come to it from the left, from the Labour movement, which historically was very anti-EU. You know, we had very, very famous members of Parliament like Tony Benn and Peter Shore, who did brilliant things way back when we were trying to stop our country joining. And Labour was traditionally anti-EU right up until Tony Blair became Prime Minister, and then he changed and the party views. And of course, because of what was a very right-wing government led by Mrs. Thatcher, that it was seen that the only way to protect workers' rights and all of those things that she was trying at that time to roll back on our trade union movement was very strong. It was felt the only way to do that was to kind of get into the EU's sphere. But it's not. It's not true. I mean, we won this referendum because of the votes of working class people in our most strongly Labour seats, because they came out and voted. Many of them had not voted before. So I think we have to recognise that if you want to win a referendum, you have to work with people you don't necessarily agree with, because once we are out, then as a country we can make our own decisions about the kind of policies we want to have. And certainly I would have a lot of differences between myself and many of the people who on the right of the Conservative Party.
Yeah, because it seems like a lot of the arguments and the possibilities of Brexit is this free trade, liberalizing the economy, privatization and everything, not really the concerns of working class people.
No, and of course one of the reasons I've been so against the EU is because of its neoliberal agenda and its reliance and priority being given to the global corporations that have actually done so much damage. And I look at issues to do with workers' rights and the conditions that many of our workforce have been put into, is the fact that free movement of labour has brought down wages and has not been in the interests of working people. So I want to see when we leave that we are able to do the kind of things that we haven't been able to do because of the EU. I mean, we want to take our railways back into public ownership now. It's almost impossible to do that now under the EU rules. Our state aid rules have stopped us helping the various industries that have been affected. So there's a very strong left-wing argument for opposing the policies of the EU, the kind of club that it is. But unfortunately, that is much more difficult to get across. Although I think I was quite encouraged by the fact that so many people out there, outside the kind of London establishment and the elite that really were running things, actually understood that more than perhaps the media gave them credit for.
Yeah, and it seems to me that after the referendum, Britain has fallen into a more defensive kind of role, where during the referendum it was more about a global and international perspective. Do you agree with me that maybe the left side had lost a little bit that international perspective to present it to people now? Yes,
I mean, I think that there was a bit of a lull as soon as we had won the referendum. You know, people kind of thought we've won. But actually, the big battle is now about how we leave, in particular, what kind of agreement we get, whether we're prepared to actually say, well, sorry, if you're not going to want to trade with us normally, we'll go over to WTO rules. But, I mean, I've always been an internationalist, and particularly because of the history of our country and the Commonwealth, which is so important. And so many of the countries that are increasing their GDP and are doing very, very well are former Commonwealth countries. So there's a loyalty to our country. So we start off at such a big advantage in terms of globally and looking internationally. But, you know, the EU has played a really quite nasty role in that they're determined that we're going to try and get any deals agreed until we've sorted out us actually leaving, and they want to delay that as much as possible, and they want our money. They're going to miss our money. But I would say, by the way, it's very important we talk about the United Kingdom. It's not just Britain. Britain excludes Northern Ireland, and Northern Ireland is very much part. We have the 4 countries: Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and England.
Yeah, I agree with that. Of course.
But it's
is this then, as I understand, your golden opportunity as well for the left side in the whole of the continent to unite more? That the left side has suffered in many elections during national elections in the recent years, where now this international movement.
Yes, I think we've seen the results that the left, social democratic left over the EU generally countries has done badly, and we need to look at the reason for that, and that is I think similar to the reason why up until relatively recently Labour was doing very badly here, because there was a kind of feeling that we had lost touch with people's aspirations and people's concerns about the way we had been led into doing things within the EU that we'd never been asked to do. Now, Jeremy Corbyn is without doubt someone who is on the left, both he and John McDonnell. They're trying very hard to keep the party together. But at some stage, I think Jeremy perhaps showing his true left-wing credentials on the EU, and certainly John McDonnell will want to be able to control our economic policy in this country if we're in government, and not be subject to the diktats of 27 others, or particularly Germany. And I think we'll see that relationship between the left here and the left in the rest of the EU becoming stronger. Now there is a good, credible opposition in this country.
Do you feel, as you said, that the left across Europe has been let down and is very underrepresented in general by their politicians? Because it seems to me that, people do want a good deal with Britain, and they want to move on with this and have better international cooperation, but they're not really represented by their politicians. They don't agree with Guy Verhofstadt or Jean-Claude Juncker, or even their elected politicians. They agree with Kate Hoey.
Well, that's very nice to think, but no, I think people do feel generally disillusioned that politicians have gone their own way, and they've lost what they originally, some of them actually stood on and tried to say that they were representing, and I think that has affected the left more than the right. And so the trade union movement, which we have a number of trade unions in this country who were EU sceptic and supported leave, but the overall big trade unions, the 2 largest, were strongly in support of remaining, and yet substantial numbers, probably majority in some of those unions, members voted to leave. So I think there's a wake-up call for the trade union movement too, and I hope that our trade union movement here could become much more involved with the trade union movement, which in other EU countries seems to be much more on the left. And then, we see what's happening in Norway and countries that are not in the EU, and we have to work together on those issues.
Yeah. In Denmark, we have a saying that with the EU, a no is a no until it's a yes, and a yes is a yes forever.
Yes.
And we voted no to the Maastricht Treaty in '92, which was basically, as I see it, saying no to the EU. But we got the Edinburgh Agreement afterwards, and that was stayed in the EU with all that came with it. Because
the leaders of the leaders of the country, it was the same. I mean, Norway, the people of Norway are totally opposed, huge majorities of going into the EU, but yet their politicians in the main parties always keep pushing it. So that is, I think it's the sort of, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I mean, there is this feeling that the EU assumed that we would have a referendum, first of all, that Leave would lose, but even when we won, they just assumed that after a few months they would be able to pat a few heads and perhaps offer a few little minor changes, and that we would go rushing back in and have another referendum. And that's not the British way of doing things, and I hope that will never happen. So I'd love to see Denmark. Any chance of Denmark having a referendum?
I think if it goes well for Britain, I think it will be But we need to be represented more with an alternative than Britain does, I
Yes.
think, because it's such a strong economy and
Yeah.
big economy where...
Yes, I mean, that's again the reason why they don't want it to be successful, because it's going to help to make certainly the movement towards referendums in countries like Denmark probably easier to put forward. I mean, the fear factor and the projects to make us all terrified have been overplayed, and I think that helped us to win. People just didn't believe, and quite rightly, the scare stories. Although there will, it's not going to be easy, and there will be difficult times. But I think there's a much more realism amongst the average member of the public out there than there is with some of our leading politicians who want to stay in the EU.
Is it any of your concern when we spoke about Norway, as you said, that the parliament there, the government implements way more EU law than the people actually want? Is it in your concern that even though Britain has voted to leave the European Union, it's still, in my eyes, a very Remain parliament and a Remain prime minister that afterwards will be implemented?
It does worry me that we could be out of the EU but still subject to a lot of its diktats because we choose to do so, and we would be choosing to do so because the decisions would be being made by people who didn't want us to leave in the first place, and think that the only way we can get better, for example, workers' rights and trade union rights is via the EU. My view is we have to make sure that when we leave, we get all those things, that we are better, and we are better in some areas anyway than the EU. But I think if we can get our fishing back, and fishing is something that I feel strongly about, if we can get the fishing control back, without pandering too much to the huge outcry that there will be from some of the other countries, including presumably Denmark, then we're on the way to being a fully independent country. But there will be, I don't think we should underestimate the power of the establishment across the EU to work together and collude to make it as difficult for us as possible, and to try and leave as much EU law hanging in there. But provided we are not subject to the Court of Justice, the European Court of Justice, then it really is up to us and our politicians and our political parties, and particularly those in the left, to try and educate more so people understand just the benefits of being independent.
Yeah, and speaking of Northern Ireland, as you did, there's been a lot of threats from especially the EU that would be a hard border.
Yes, I mean, I think people use these terms. I mean, I think it's important to remind people that the only time there was a really hard border with structures and customs people and police and so on was when the IRA were trying to kill people and coming across the border. I reject completely the idea that somehow if the normal customs controls or ways of doing it with new technology, that should in any way stop the peace process. I mean, stop if people choose to go back to killing, it won't be because of us leaving the European Union. It will be because they have chosen to go back to killing, and I think we shouldn't pander to any of that nonsense. It's quite possible, and it should be quite possible to have a border that allows people to cross, because we've got the common travel area anyway, which was there long before we joined the common market, and also to allow trade to go on the way it goes on between Switzerland and other countries around them, or Norway indeed. If there's goodwill, and that's up to the Republic of Ireland to start realising that their future is probably better off and their economy is more linked to the mainland Great Britain and Northern Ireland than it is to the rest of the EU. When you take away what the Republic of Ireland exports to Northern Ireland and to mainland Britain, and indeed uses Britain then to pass on things to the rest of the EU, and what it does to the rest of the world, actually it's very little is really, really dependent on their sale to the EU. And there's a lot of people now in the Republic of Ireland beginning to actually think about and mention and talk about the idea that there could be an Irexit, you know, that they should be thinking that their future is much better tied in with the United Kingdom. But there's a political issue there which goes beyond the EU, and also, of course, they're in the euro, which makes it slightly more difficult too.
Yeah. Should United Kingdom and Ireland maybe look to be inspired by the Nordic countries, where we have countries inside the EU, outside the EU, but we have, even in Denmark, we have parts of Denmark, Greenland and Faroe Islands that are outside, but we still have soft border.
Yes.
And our economy is very tight together in our
Yeah,
trading.
I think everything, we had a very good meeting with the head of Swiss customs, and his point, which I think is just so important, was nothing is impossible if there's goodwill and if countries want it to happen. And I think that's what we have to go in, being confident that what we are offering is in the interest not just of ourselves but of the Republic of Ireland as well, and other EU countries.